Well, for the second year in a row, we were treated to two absolute instant classics in the college football playoff semifinals. We're here live, ready to break it all down right here on the Three Technique.
One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, happy New Year, one and all. What a way to start 2024. Two absolute instant classics in the college football playoff semifinal. The Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, both delivered big time, lived up to the billing of the marquee matchups that we were promised here, guys. Welcome in one and all to a live edition of the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmys and Joes. I'm joined by Garrett Turney. I'm also joined by Mr. Drew Hull rejoining us as a special guest from the Southern Boys Sports Podcast. Fellas, I'm struggling to catch my breath after the ending of that Sugar Bowl. How are we feeling on this New Year's night?
My gosh, that was insane. I mean, because when we left Mitch's place, we got to go watch it over at Mitch's place. Mitch getting up early in the morning, so he's not going to be on the show tonight. But when we left Mitch's place, it was pretty much a general consensus that, yeah, this Washington game is pretty out of hand, and Texas won't have enough time to come back at this point. We're kind of casually getting ready to stroll in here and talk about how, Washington cruised. And, I mean, gosh, both of these games coming down to the very last play. And I mean, last play for both of them, where either team in just one play can win this thing, walk away and all that. So, wow, what a day, college football. It does not disappoint. This is, I mean, maybe gave last year's semifinals a run for their money in terms of just pure entertainment value. And last year's are pretty dang good too. So, man, I'm excited to see what comes out of the championship game. Hopefully a little bit better than last year's.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. It was phenomenal. I feel like it definitely summed up kind of what this college football season was all about. And that was kind of like an uncertainty of who the next top dog is, who's going to be that team in the national championship, who's going to be the national champion. Even when we, over on our podcast, were going through preseason takes and expectations and predictions, it was kind of like, well, anybody could really do anything. Like Georgia's going to be good. We know that. Michigan, Alabama, Florida State, we knew who was going to be good. It's just about who's going to get in that 14 playoff and shake some things up. So it definitely delivered. It was definitely kind of the factor of anything can happen, and anything did happen. Like Garrett said, two games that went literally down to the last play, and Jalen Milroe gets stopped. Texas gets stopped with that throw to Adonai Mitchell in the back of the end zone. And ultimately, like you said there, Trey, a great national championship game it is shaping up to be. But really entertaining games, obviously. And like I said, kind of summarized the overall gist of what the 2023 college football season was all about.
Wait, Drew, are you saying that his name is not pronounced Adonai?
I don't know.
Adonai?
It was, I thought it was Adonai, and then they were saying it different on, Sean McDonough was saying it different on the ESPN broadcast. So,
Herbstreit butchered it. He called him Adonai in the
oh, really?
call. That was pretty egregious. It's definitely not Adonai. We may not know exactly how to say it right, but it's not Adonai.
Well, Craig Way on the Longhorn radio network says Adonai. I've heard it Adonai 100% of the time until today when Kirk Herbstreit said it. So I'm going to roll with that. But fellas, you guys set the table really well. It was a fantastic day of football all around. The games lived up to the hype. We predicted a couple of barn burners. We predicted a couple of absolute classics. And that's exactly what we got in the Rose Bowl, in the Sugar Bowl. Before we get too deep into the weeds of these games in particular, I'm going to thank our sponsors real quick. This show and every show is brought to you by the Transfer Portal CFB. As the playoffs heat up, as we get sprint towards the national championship game next Monday, make sure you're tuned in to the Transfer Portal CFB. All of those articles, all of that video content, social media content coming out from the boys over at HQ. It's great stuff, and it's definitely worth your time to read. Make sure that you're checking that out. We're also brought to you, of course, always by Home Field Apparel. We love the stuff over at Home Field. I know a lot of our stockings were stuffed by them over the Christmas holiday, and you can make sure that you're repping your favorite team as well. Garrett and Drew both have Michigan shirts on. If you're a Michigan fan, if you're a Washington fan, you need to gear up for the championship game. If you're a Texas fan or an Alabama fan that needs to, drown your sorrows in a new purchase, retail therapy. Either way, 3TechPod is the code, 15% off your first purchase at Home Field. And click the link in our bio if you're a return customer. Make sure that you are gearing up to represent your favorite team. Fellas, without further ado, let's just jump right in and kind of live react to that Sugar Bowl matchup. Final score, Washington 31, Washington 37, Texas 31. What a wild finish in New Orleans. As like you said off the top, Garrett, we were watching that game all together at the Mason home, and we kind of wrote Texas off, and that was very foolish of us to do. It was still a 2-possession game. As Washington kept kicking field goals there in the second half, part of me was thinking, they're leaving the door open just a little bit. And sure enough, Texas drives all the way down into the Washington red zone, gets one last play, shades of Mac Brown in 2009, right? In the Big 12 championship where he's holding up the one finger, put 1 second back on the clock. We're going to get one more shot at this. But this time, Texas comes up just short. The throw to the end zone falls incomplete. Oh my goodness. What a track meet of a game. The offenses lived up to the billing. Washington's offense was, other than coming up short in the red zone and, settling for field goals a couple of times, the Washington offense was flawless in this game. Kalen DeBoer and the offensive staff called a fantastic game. Michael Penix executed. He was 11 for 11 in the third quarter at one point. Just ridiculous video game numbers. You can see it on the screen there, 29 of 38 for 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. And guys, we highlighted this on our preview show. What was going to give the Longhorns trouble was their pass defense, and that certainly came to fruition tonight.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Either way, I agree with you. Texas obviously falls a little bit short, and I know they're kind of talking about it over there in the chat, but a really questionable last couple of play calls there at the end of the game. Obviously, that dump down to the running back in the backfield, very, very questionable. I'm assuming there was other routes down the field. It didn't really show it on the broadcast. But even throwing that ball, because if you get tackled in bounds, I think they said it on the broadcast, that's the season, and that's obviously the game. And I just saw a meme on Barstool Sports that was like Texas's last 4 play calls, and it was like a scribble scrabble sheet that was drawn by like a 4-year-old. Like that's what it seemed like, is that there was really no structure. And I do commend them for going down the field and making something happen and making it a game and getting in the red zone, because that was obviously a really good play calling. Couple of plays there, but once they got in the red zone, they had a couple shots at the end zone, which one they wasted on that dump down, and then a couple jump balls. I feel like they could have got down there, moved the chains one more time, made that clock stop, then go for the end zone. But I guess it's just Monday morning quarterback. You can sit up here and say that all you want, but a great game, like you said, Trey, for Michael Penix. He was dealing. I saw people talking on social media that he was playing mad. He didn't win the Heisman. He was doing this, that, and the other. And 430 yards, 2 touchdowns, looked really poised. They ran him a little bit. And I know Dylan Johnson got hurt in those last minutes of the game, which ended up kind of giving Texas an opportunity to squirm back in the game. But either way, he had a very phenomenal game. And all the way, a great game from Washington. They stay undefeated on the season. And Washington, Michigan will be a good game. But in this Sugar Bowl, like you said, Washington kind of let it slip away. Texas made something out of nothing and made for another instant classic.
Yeah, a couple of turnovers from Texas as well. Fumbles in the second half really set the stage for Washington to take control of the game. Again, ultimately almost let it slip away, but they were in control there at the end. Garrett, as we look at just this performance from Washington's offense, it wasn't just one guy, right? They were spreading the ball around. What impressed you the most about that performance?
I think Michael Penix's poise was just remarkable. To be in this spot, to be, in a playoff spot, hadn't been there before, right? He had been, championship spot was his biggest so far for his conference championship. And to be able to go in here and I don't feel like I saw him make too many bad decisions tonight. I mean, he knew when to tuck it and run, knew when to throw it away. But man, he knew that he could trust his guys downfield. He was slinging that thing. I mean, just absolutely just crushing it down the field, going vertical. A couple of huge plays over the top that really set him apart. For anything, I thought that the funny thing today, and we'll talk about this especially with Michigan, but it felt like both teams that won today made some mistakes or maybe made some questionable decisions throughout the game that let the other team kind of stay with it. Washington felt like the better team for the vast majority of this game. And then it was just the little mistakes. They couldn't quite punch in touchdowns that let Texas stay in this game. We'd even talked about a little bit, tonight that, they go score touchdowns on a couple of those turnovers. This thing's wraps. This is a, 45 to 50 point effort from Washington. And who cares if Texas scores at the very end of the game? It doesn't matter. Right. And so the fact that it was as close as it was, I think partly, you got to tip your hat to Texas on defense and, keeping Washington from scoring there. But, I think they're going to have to put out a slightly more polished product if they're going to do anything against Michigan. That defense today from Michigan looked pretty dang good. But, to have the trust that they had in their guys, right, to be able to say, Rome's down there somewhere, right, and to just chug it up and say, hey, I'm going to believe in my guy down the field, right? That was huge. And to be able to do that, I think, was a massive, massive credit to Washington, to what they've built through the year. And there's a reason I picked Washington to win this game. It's because I trusted Penix to be clutch when he needed to be. And despite some mistakes and despite not the perfect game, he was poised. He made overall smart decisions with the football. And he ultimately didn't cost his team anything. And honestly came up with some huge plays down the stretch to keep him in it.
Yeah, and I'll go off just one last thing on this is it honestly seemed like in both of the games, and especially in the second game between Washington and Texas, it seemed like the winning team was playing less scared. Like it just seemed like Michael Penix was playing free. He was out there running. He was throwing the ball into tight windows, and he was making plays. And it seemed like in that first game in the Rose Bowl, with a couple bad snaps from McLaughlin, the center, Jalen Milroe was playing kind of timid. He wasn't making throws. The play calling was really short. They weren't making a lot of plays down the field in the passing game. And a lot of run plays with Jace McClellan. And he was a great running back. But at the end of the day, I feel like Washington and Michigan, and especially in that late 2-minute drill that Michigan pulled off, like they were moving the ball down the field. That catch by Roman Wilson and a great throw by J.J. McCarthy ended up putting them in the position to win that game. Right. Michael Penix threw for 430 yards. They threw it almost 40 times. You know what I mean? And so the trust and the ability to try and push the ball down the field and be really aggressive ultimately paid off. It seemed like, as Texas was also aggressive, it just kind of seemed like Washington wasn't afraid. Alabama seemed afraid with those bad snaps. And as their defense played really good, their offense just couldn't get the job done. So I feel like the aggression from the two winners today, it like you said, it caused some mistakes. It caused a couple turnovers, especially on the Michigan side of things. They almost shot themselves in the foot with that muffed punt there at the end of the game. And so a couple of mistakes from both sides, but overall it was really fun to watch these two winning teams come out, be aggressive, and it's going to make for an interesting final two teams with both those guys coming in hot.
Yeah, and a quick thing real quick, I'm going to point this out too. Fumbles killed Texas in this game. Yep. They absolutely killed Texas in this game. I know that they had a couple of like muffed with the punts and whatnot, but man, it just seemed like fumble, balls on the turf, coughed it up, couldn't keep control of the ball. That, ultimately killed Texas because that turned into some Washington points, and they didn't convert all those into touchdowns, but even just kicking field goals was the difference in this game, right? It's 2 field goals is your difference right here. So for me, I look at this and I say, man, that just really, really sucks that Texas wasn't able to keep control of the ball. And even if they don't score on those, it's a tie game, right? Because those are 2 field goals that you keep off the board. If you find a way to go down, score any points on those, you win this football game. And so, man, it sucks to see that, but that's part of the game, right? It's turnovers are part of the game. And, at the end of the day, it's going to be something that, the Texas running backs and the Texas players are going to have to look at themselves and say, man, we were that close. It was just the little things, right? It was just the little things, the little bit of execution that they couldn't pull off that ultimately ended up biting them.
Yeah, it was the turnovers. They were the huge ones, but the procedural penalties also really biting the Longhorns. Only 66 penalty yards, but 10 penalties total, backing them up about 5 yards at a time every single time, it seemed like. And it always seemed to come at a big pivotal moment when they needed to convert a first down, back them up 5 yards. Guys, I want to highlight a couple more just maybe unsung heroes for the Washington Huskies today. Rome Odunze gets all the headlines, and rightfully so, but Jalen Polk, 5 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. Jack Westover, the tight end, had a great game, 6 receptions for 59 yards, did a lot of the dirty work, getting a bunch of yards. I remember I listened to a part of this game on the Longhorns radio network, and Craig Way and his color commentator were just so frustrated at Westover getting these big chunk plays on second down and setting up third and shorts over and over and over again. This down the stretch in this game.
Really impressive snags in that game too. Westover was kind of an unsung hero, like you're saying. Just some big snags and some big spots for him.
Yeah, and Michael Penix, just one last thing about him, just making some outstanding next level NFL ready throws, zipping it right past a couple safeties on one of the touchdown passes. Just, I think he made himself a lot of money tonight if he wasn't already up there.
Yeah. Well, someone else I want to highlight, Jabbar Muhammad played a fantastic game outside. These Texas receivers are extremely talented, and as a whole, they didn't have a lot of success against them. I know there were some, like, obviously when you play receivers that talented, like, you're going to give up some. But, I mean, as a whole, he kept those receivers in check. Xavier Worthy, caught 2 balls for 45. Looking up and down here, Adonai Mitchell, obviously 4 for 32 in the touchdown, but not massive receiving numbers there. Overall, held the receivers in check for Texas, and whoever he was lined up against in whatever situation did a really, really good job out there on the perimeter. So need to shout him out because a lot of people were, trying to on the broadcast. I heard him a couple times saying there was a mismatch because he was short. I remember a time when having a shorter corner who was extremely athletic and talented to the ball wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And so I want to shout him out a little bit for knowing how to play a ball and competing out there, doing a good job.
Yeah, and I'll build off that just a little bit. He obviously had a super impressive game. And one of the big things that kind of concerned me coming in was obviously I picked Texas. I picked Texas to win the game. And one of the main reasons for that is Texas just had so many weapons. They just seem like one of those teams like Washington on offense just has a weapon at every spot, right? All 3 receivers for Washington, like you said, Trey, can make plays. But the same thing for Texas. Xavier Worthy didn't have the best of games, but I thought maybe, hey, Jordan Whittington will step up or Jaden Blue or CJ Baxter will step up. And the kind of key piece that I anticipated going in was Jatavian Sanders. And he's super, super talented, super, super quick and athletic for his size. He had a decent game, 6 catches, 75 yards, and made some big catches down the stretch. But ultimately, I commend Washington for being able to kind of restrain him as well, because like you said, understanding your job out wide and stopping some of the best receivers in college football is obviously one of those main game plan points. But stopping a guy like Jatavian Sanders from, ripping you up, I think that's what separates kind of like a great team, national championship team. And then maybe a not so good team is going to say, okay, we have Adonai Mitchell, we have Xavier Worthy locked down on the outside, but Jatavian Sanders, and I saw it multiple times throughout the game, including Alabama early in the season, just continue to rip him up in big moments. But either way, I feel like he was a leading receiver, but he didn't get in the end zone, and it was ultimately a successful task for Washington and pass coverage in general, like you said there, Garrett.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Garrett.
I was going to say, only thing left on this storyline for me is just, man, it really feels like that was Texas's opportunity, right? Like, this is stuff we'll talk about all offseason long, I'm sure, but man, as Texas is coming into the SEC and they're going to have to go up against, Georgia and Bama and Ole Miss and Tennessee and like whoever
Michigan
else
in the non-conference next year.
Yeah, and next year Michigan non-conference. I mean, this is just going forward, even not just next year but beyond. Like Texas is still a really, really good football team. If they can keep their roster together, they'll still be extremely competitive. But they're still going to have a harder path next year than they had this year. It really felt like this needed to be a moment for Texas, and man, it's gotta suck knowing that you were that close, right? You were that close with, opportunities to, maybe it was a couple of fumbles or a couple of penalties or just something, but you were that close to a national title before transitioning to the SEC. Like, I'm not saying they can't compete in the SEC, but man, like that road is going to get so much harder for them going forward. Just has to feel super empty right now on that Texas sideline and that Texas fan base, knowing that you were that close.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how they respond next year. Man, that ESPN broadcast seemed to be ready to just kick Quinn Ewers to the curb and usher in Arch Manning down the stretch there. That was just, I can't believe they actually went that far with the production. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's going to be fascinating to see how they respond. Guys, one last thing I want to shout out for the Washington Huskies. Their offensive line did not give up a sack tonight, and that's huge. That was a big battle that we circled going into the preview on this one. Texas defensive line versus Washington's offensive line. Big victory for that offensive line. They had a lot of holes in the run game as well. They kept Michael Penix clean. He scrambled around a little bit. He had to run just a little bit, but big victory for the Huskies right there, and it led directly to them winning the actual football game. Guys, I think that puts a bow on the Sugar Bowl. Let's talk Rose Bowl here, as you two are both repping the victors.
Yes, sir.
Michigan Wolverines. And, it was a fantastic game as well. Final score, Michigan 27, Alabama 20 in overtime. This was a very, very interesting game because it felt like at different points, both teams could have ran away with this one, right? I think in the first half, Garrett, you showed us the gif of the guy just shooting himself in the foot. And that was Michigan at multiple points in this game. The turnover early, the muffed punt on the first drive that leads directly to an Alabama touchdown. A couple missed opportunities here and there throughout the game, but they weathered the storm. Alabama looked like they had an opportunity to run away with this one. They had all the momentum in the fourth quarter, up 17-13. They're driving, and then Jalen Milroe fumbles. And that didn't directly lead to points for Michigan. They missed a field goal on that ensuing drive, but it definitely sucked the air out of that Alabama sideline, because if they drive down and score or even kick a field goal there, I think this could be a completely different result that we're talking about this evening. So both teams had their chances, but credit Michigan for weathering the storm, for being the more physical team. They just bullied Alabama up front this entire game, both on offense and defense. They did not let Alabama pin their ears back and rush the passer very often. And on the defensive side of the ball, they just destroyed the Alabama offensive line, which was a huge matchup we were watching for on the preview. So guys, gutsy performance from JJ McCarthy, 2 of 21 through the air, 3 touchdowns, added some, chain movers on the ground as well. Blake Corum gets the game-winning touchdown in overtime on a great run. But, when we were previewing this game, we said, this is going to be a physical defensive slugfest, and credit the Wolverines for weathering the storm.
Yeah, and the crazy thing to me was, look, when we broke this down and we talked about this, everyone kept saying that Michigan hasn't played a team as physical as Alabama, and there's no way that. And I was trying to caution everybody, guys. I don't know that Alabama's played a team as physical as Michigan. I know that Georgia's extremely good, but man, the violence that Michigan played with up front, the absolute, destruction up front on the defensive side, especially getting to the quarterback twice in the first 3 plays, really just setting the tone that, hey man, this ain't gonna be like it used to be. Like this is a long day for you, Jalen Milroe. You're gonna get some, but it's going to be a hard process for you. I think that really set the tone early and kind of let everybody on that Bama sideline know how it was going to be from the Michigan side. Man, and you say weathering the storm. How many times did Michigan have to weather the storm? From the first play, needing a review to make sure that wasn't really a pick, to, after the 3-and-out that they got, muffing the punt, giving up a touchdown on a blown, gap assignment from a linebacker. Several of those on the day on both sides, by the way. And man, just being able to come back, put together impressive drives, stay in the game, keep your head above water. Man, just really, really impressive to be able to see what they're able to do in bouncing back time after time, even at the very end of the game, right? Bama's driving. It looks like the clock's about to run out. They're about to go in here, put some points on the board. To be able to push them back and force the field goal, get the ball back with the ability to tie, and then, sprint down the field as fast as they possibly could and put that ball in the end zone. That was a massive bounce back for them. At that point, they had all the momentum. And man, just that Blake Corum unrelenting touchdown in overtime, that felt like what Michigan was all day. I feel like that was an overall picture of what Michigan was. Just you come at me, sidestep, drag a guy, spin, right? Just he wasn't going to be denied the end zone, and neither was Michigan for this W. I'm super impressed with the way Michigan played today. I think they were the better team. Man, they tried to give it away in some spots, but they were definitely the better team on the field today, and I think that they deserved the dub.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Obviously, for Jalen Milroe through the air, not a very successful day. And I think that can be accredited to Michigan's defense more than anything. And a lot of people on Twitter, I know a lot of Florida State fans were, oh, look at Jalen Milroe having a bad game. But, I mean, if you look down the field, like there's videos of Will Johnson's coverage on Jermaine Burton and some of those other DBs, whether it's Mike Sanders, or some of those other guys just guarding the wide receivers on Alabama side of the football. There wasn't really anything to throw to. Some conservative play calls from Tommy Rees in that offense. Yep. It just looked like kind of a cluster on offense for Alabama. Jalen Milroe, you can see it right there on the screen, ran the ball 21 times. And that's honestly like unbelievable. He really had a hard time. And when I was watching the game, at least, it kind of seemed like Michigan was doing an excellent job keeping those linebackers out wide and eliminating the scramble, also eliminating the opportunity for the Alabama receivers or running backs to get outside. And it was honestly a great game to watch from Michigan's side of things. They scrapped the game out. Both special teams units were not having the best of days. But J.J. McCarthy did his job, and people can call him a game manager and call him, not a top quarterback because of the way that he plays the game. But I mean, 17 passes, 221 yards, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, a very efficient game for him. And like you said, Garrett, Blake Corum, a relentless runner, one of the better running backs in college football all year long. And I will say Jace McClellan played an excellent game for Alabama. But overall, it just felt like Michigan's defense really came to play. The snapping problems from Chase McLaughlin and the Alabama offense just really sloppy, which is kind of weird from a Nick Saban Alabama team. But I think that's just the style of play Michigan plays with. Like you said, Garrett, they were playing really aggressive. They were playing really kind of non-relenting defense, and that'll shake you. It was the first time. I'm a Tennessee fan. I watched them play my team. I watched them play a lot. And even in that SEC championship game, really even in that loss to Texas, they didn't really look like they were going in the fetal position or like they were down. And in this game, it looked like a lot of the time Michigan was controlling and Alabama was trying to fight back and get back on top. And they were kind of underneath the whole game. And when it came down to it, Alabama had a chance. It was a weird kind of like RPO play call, that last play of the game. But either way, great defense from Michigan. And an excellent opportunity for them to win a national championship for the first time since 1997 or 1999, I believe. So
it's been a while, yeah. Well, yeah, it's crazy to say it too, because the snapping problems comes from when the defensive line is playing so good. You're not even thinking about the snap. You're thinking about where you got to get off, who you got to fill, who you're hitting next. Massive credit to Michigan's D line on that. I thought that the D line versus O line battle on that side of the ball was the entire story. Their ability to get pressure, whoop the offensive line's tail on several plays. There were several that, someone would go make a play in the backfield, like, oh, if he just slipped past him, I'm like, what are you talking about? The rest of the offensive line got whooped everywhere else. Like, it was just somebody else's a yard later, right? And so it was really impressive for me to look at the way that Michigan played on defense for, all the talk. And I am definitely in the camp of the SEC plays overall better football across the board. But for all the talk about SEC physicality and all that, Michigan came to play. That Michigan was the more physical team. Michigan was ready to ram it down your throat and just take it to you. And boy, did they. They absolutely out-physicaled Alabama. And that's probably where a lot of the snapping problems came from, was he's not thinking about where he's snapping the ball, making sure he's getting it right in the right spot. He's thinking about, getting off so he can chip and getting off so he can fill that gap, because he's been getting whooped his entire game.
Sorry. Just one last point on it is kind of the matchup that we've got heading in with Michigan winning this game. And it was such a good prove-it game for Michigan to come out and make such a statement by beating Alabama, because people were talking about their strength of schedule. They haven't played this, that, and the other. They beat the SEC champion And this is actually the comment that I was wanting to get to, was that the defense for Michigan is ultimately going to get in Penix's face. The secondary for Michigan is going to be able to shut down those receivers for Washington. And it's almost like a perfect clash of the Titans between what proved to be one of the best offensive lines in college football after their showing today against Texas, giving up 0 sacks, a great secondary for Michigan that's going to have to hold one of the best receiving corps, if not the best receiving corps in college football in Washington. So it's honestly what proves to be at this point in college football. And I know there were the 1 and 2 seeds, and I know that, but I think a lot of people were still saying, is Washington legit? Texas has a lot of talent. I think this is the 2 most talented all-around football teams in college football this year. And the ability for both these teams to come out here, compete in the national championship game is really going to test Michael Penix as a quarterback because he's going to have a lot of pressure. They're going to bring a lot of stunt blitzes. They did it a lot. Jesse Minter's really good at that. And they've got a great secondary. So the offense for Washington is going to be tested. But let's not sleep on Washington's defense. J.J. McCarthy is going to be tested. So it's kind of like it goes both ways, and both teams kind of proved why I'm one of the best teams in college football. And we knew that coming in, but I think we've got the top 2 in the national championship. A great game here in the Rose Bowl, and Michigan defense really impressed me a lot.
Yeah, you can't say enough about this Michigan defense. Held Alabama to just 288 total yards, 116 through the air, 172 on the ground. Guys, they have not been held to that low of a yardage total since 2017. So
Wow.
It's been a minute since Alabama has been shut down to that level. And the biggest story was the 6 sacks, the 10 tackles for loss. Alabama had just 1 sack and 1 tackle for loss on the day on the defensive side. Can't say enough about the effort from the Michigan Wolverines. I want to talk more about the winners than I do the losers typically, but I do want to ask you guys, you hinted at it a little bit both ways here. There was a lot of poor execution from the Crimson Tide, whether it be botched snaps, whether it be a procedural penalty at an inopportune time, tons of uncharacteristically just bad execution from a Nick Saban coach team, but also really interesting play calls at different points in the game, right? Drew, you hinted at the conservative route running. You look at Jalen Milroe's stats, he completed vast majority of his passes, right? But they just weren't chucking it downfield. And it seems like when their offense has worked the best this year, it's letting Jalen Milroe run and letting him just use that howitzer of an arm to launch it downfield and, hope a receiver can make a play. That's been their most efficient offense this week, and they got away from both of those things. Had some design runs for Jalen Milroe, and they worked for the most part. But then at the end, they really went away from, letting him make a play in space. That's really my biggest complaint there on that last play call. I don't know if it was more of a play call thing. I don't know if it was an execution. It looked like they pulled a guard that he was maybe supposed to follow, and Jalen Milroe just kind of maybe went through the wrong opening there, thought he saw an opening up the middle, didn't, and it closed too quickly. I don't know. That's for the film room to decide, but it just seemed like a lot of uncharacteristically bad execution and uncharacteristically bad coaching, quite frankly, from this Alabama staff that didn't put their players in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, and I will say, I was thinking about this earlier in the game, and it's kind of a constant theme throughout, not just Alabama. Obviously, they're elevated because they're in the national semifinal, but throughout college football in general. And the one thing that I want to hint to is the transfer portal and the opportunity to bring in guys that you may not be in your system for 4 years, may not come in as a freshman, petrified of Nick Saban, then they build their way up to the starting lineup. Talk about a guy who came over from Louisiana and Trey Amos. He had his downtimes. He made some dumb mistakes, not only in this game, but throughout the season. And he didn't see the field as a starter, but he was in the slot a lot. He was a backup corner a lot. Jermaine Burton, a transfer from Georgia. Like, those aren't guys that are in Nick Saban's system consistently. And those seem to be the guys that Jermaine Burton is jawing all game. He's coming over to social media and causing problems. And that's not something that we're really used to seeing from Alabama in general. And so there was pre-snap penalties from Alabama that we're not used to seeing. There was snap problems from Chase McLaughlin that we're not used to seeing. But one of the biggest things just throughout the whole game and throughout college football in general is just the inability to come in, kind of create a structure and guys that you're getting out of high school, like you obviously could before the transfer portal era kind of made its mark on college football. But now that you've got 21-year-old guys, 22-year-old guys coming into your program already playing college football for 3 or 4 years, already playing for another coach or two, it seems like coaches, and including Nick Saban, who's arguably the greatest coach of all time at this level, it seems like they're having a hard time kind of reining in and becoming more disciplined. And when you look at teams who don't utilize the portal as much or have more of a homegrown team and guys who have been there for a while, those teams seem more disciplined. Michigan doesn't have a lot of guys that they utilize through the portal. They have some, but Will Johnson came there as a true freshman. J.J. McCarthy waited his turn. Blake Corum's been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. Offensive line is pretty set, and they got some defensive transfers to help them out. But it was a really disciplined game from Michigan. And so, yeah, that's just one thing I observed throughout the season is kind of that transfer portal aspect of the game kind of coming into play with the X's and O's.
Well, maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but it sounds like Nick Saban needs to pick his portal players better if there's going to be problems in the attitude and everything.
Yeah,
so maybe
seriously.
Big guys are going to be a little better. No, I mean, obviously, you're going to get that a little bit. I think you got a really good point there. For me, when I look at this, Trey, you were talking about not using the cannon of the arm. He tried it a couple times, but it was covered. I mean, down the field, deep shots. He tried. I remember 2 specifically. One, he tried to go down the field to Burton on the sideline, and Johnson had him just blanketed. I mean, just there wasn't anything there. I think it went a couple yards out of bounds anyways, but there wasn't anywhere to throw that football. If you threw that ball in bounds, it's going Michigan's way. And there's another one. I think they decided, let's try to attack the middle of the field. Rod Moore had that thing covered too. I can't remember if it was Burton running the route or if it was Bond or whoever else, but Burton had Rod Moore. He had it covered up, and all the way down the field, walking with him step for step, gets thrown, adjusts to the ball, and he just steps in the way of it, knocks it away, no problem. And so they tried to go for the deep stuff, but it just wasn't there. And regardless of when they tried to or not, the O-line was getting whooped. I mean, they didn't have time to go down the field anyways, and so. I do think part of it was going away from what was working, but also part of it was just what was working doesn't against Michigan. They just didn't let you. It was a terrible matchup. They ran into an absolute buzzsaw of a front seven who, got after the quarterback and was harassing Miller all night. And then also you flip that to the other side and, he got a couple of chances at some chunk plays, but it just wasn't there. There weren't those opportunities. He threw good balls, but they just weren't there to be caught for the receivers. I think the best ball I thought he threw was that kind of out-breaking route towards the sideline that he caught with the 1 foot in for Isaiah Bond, just kind of floated up and over a guy. That was his best ball, I think, of the day. It's a good chunk play, but it's not going to be there for you. And if you can't do that all day, they weren't going to have success against Michigan. That just you had to have some kind of balance. They didn't have it.
You make great points, guys, and I think it's something that they're going to be talking about for a long time either way in Tuscaloosa. And it's going to be fascinating. Just like we talked about with Texas, it's going to be fascinating to see how Alabama responds to this. Nick Saban is not going to be done. Just when everyone wants to count him out, that's when he seems to do his best. So we'll see how they respond in the offseason. We'll see if they adjust their strategy in the recruiting game, in the transfer portal game. But that's a bunch of conversations to leave for the offseason. We've got one more college football game, gentlemen. Next Monday night in Houston, it's Washington versus Michigan, the 2 undefeateds squaring off, maybe the best offense in the country going up against maybe the best defense in the country. I can't wait to see how that one shapes out. Early line, Michigan is opened as a 4.5-point favorite in the books. I am fascinated to dive into this matchup, guys, and it's going to be a lot of fun to research this over this week as we'll bring a full preview right here on our channel. I'm sure Southern Boys will have all the coverage as well. What's your initial take on this one? You don't have to give me a score prediction or anything, but just what are you excited to see in the college football playoff championship game next Monday?
Well, I think it's going to be refreshing not to have the game end up in a 58-point blowout. I don't anticipate that happening. But yeah, seriously, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
But Trey, like you said, we're doing a stream of the game, and we did it last year and ended up getting out of hand, and it was brutal. Sitting there while TCU is just getting killed. But this year, I'm just really excited for what seems to be the best two teams in college football. There's not going to be a lot of complaints about, aside from Florida State fans, there's not going to be a lot of complaints about, well, this team shouldn't have been in the national championship. This team should have been in the national championship. Michigan had multiple ranked wins. They beat the SEC champion. Washington beat Oregon twice, comes in and beats a very good Texas team on a neutral site. Both teams deserve to be in. Both teams are really, really good. And like I said, kind of that yin and yang between the defense and the offense that we're going to see. Rod Moore, Mike Sanderstroh, Will Johnson out wide in that secondary for the Wolverines, and then obviously a very talented wide receiver core for Washington. That's going to be highly anticipated. Mason Graham and that defensive line for Michigan are going to come in hot. And I think kind of the key point for this game is going to be how J.J. McCarthy controls the offense. Is he going to be able to keep up with the arm of Michael Penix? Because I think the defense for Michigan will do their job. They'll do some good things. And they'll hold Michael Penix below 37 points, I think. But either way, J.J. McCarthy is going to have to keep scoring. And like you said, Garrett, Jabbar Muhammad had a great game. This is not a slouch of a defense for Washington. And they might be able to run the ball. But if J.J. McCarthy is not consistent and reverts back to what he did in the playoff last year, he had some stinker games earlier on in the season. I think he's the swing point in this game against Washington. But either way, it's going to be a really good game. Should be a very tight game, and excited to see that Washington offense and a great Michigan defense collide in the national title. Should be a good one.
Yeah, I think you're dead on. I think what McCarthy does is going to be huge. I think obviously him having to keep up with what Penix is going to do, at least try to do against a very, very good Michigan defense. But if you're not careful, if you make too many mistakes, you're going to give too many opportunities to Penix, and he'll capitalize on a good chunk of them. So. The thing I like, though, is that someone's going to win a championship next week that hadn't won one in a little while.
Yes, sir.
I'm excited that we're going to get a new champion, at least a newer champion than, previous years. We're not going to see, Bama or Georgia or, Ohio
Clemson.
State or LSU or someone else who's just been winning championships the last 20 years or so. We're going to get somebody else who hadn't done it in a little while. So I'm excited to see that. And I'll quote my guy Teddy right here one more time. Blue by 1,000. I'm gonna vibe with that. Teddy's got the vibes. Teddy understands. So
yes, sir.
We love it. We absolutely love it. I'll be pulling for Michigan as a fan at least a little bit, but no, I'm just excited for a great championship game. It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch, and I'm sure we'll have the full breakdown later in the week when we get a chance to look at it. But it really feels like we're getting a strength against strength here with the way that these two teams match up. It should be a really, really fun one to just see who wins out in some good ball.
Yeah, new blood. I'm excited for that for sure. I know it's weird to say as Michigan is literally the winningest college football program of all time, but Michigan seeking their first title since 97, Washington their first since 1991. It feels good to have fresh competition, even if it is teams that have been there, 30 years ago. It's really good to have those teams have a chance, and we'll get a new champion that we haven't had in quite some time. So,
Trey, some might say that the dream of the 90s is alive in Houston.
It's alive and well in Houston, and that is a great way to wrap this one up tonight, guys. We are so excited.
The Houston locals can keep it a little more tame for those ESPN cameras than New Orleans. That was
brutal.
So bizarre.
That was brutal.
America, baby. America.
I don't know why
don't have a
take
game in
the
New
camera
Orleans
down there, but
don't have a game in NOLA.
Don't have the
seriously.
camera.
Don't shots at Bourbon
that's
Street if you
what I'm
don't
saying.
want.
Why are you walking down that street? That's terrible
Exactly.
idea.
Don't show a camera shot of Bourbon Street if you don't want inappropriate things being shown on television.
Exactly.
That's what I have always said. So, guys, it's been a joy to talk about these games tonight. Make sure you're following along on our channel, like and subscribe, and make sure that you're following along to the Southern Boys Sports Podcast as well. They are at SO_boy_sports on Twitter. And make sure that you're following their awesome coverage as well, guys. For Drew Hull, for Garrett Turney, for Mitch Mason, I'm Trey Reeves. We'll see you guys next time as we preview the national championship.
Gracious, how about